Morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Matthew Lyllist, and unfortunately I cannot be with you at the conference today due to unforeseen circumstances, but I certainly hope that this video recording will suffice and that you find the next 8 minutes very, very useful for your teaching. In keeping with the theme of the conference, which is the art of English, I have titled my piece Art Appreciation for All, using classical literature and traditional texts to not only engage our students, but to upskill them as well. When we think about all the new curriculum implementation that's taken place over the last months and last few years, especially with the New South Wales syllabus, text selection is at the top of our list in terms of jobs that we need to do. And if we think about our teaching and how we deliver English as an art museum or an art gallery, then we get to curate and design the opportunities for them to view those artworks. So we get to show what we think they should see. And I think that's very important, that we show them not only the more popular, accessible, contemporary texts, but also the classics. There's a reason why plays and scripts are still being studied hundreds of years after they've been produced. And I think we need to show them what those qualities of those texts are that make them so great and that they can appreciate them. And if we look at, for example, the Mona Lisa, if students do not have an understanding of Renaissance art or Leonardo da Vinci, should we stop them from viewing it? Just because students may not be familiar with Edvard Munch's The Scream or the idea of expressionist art does not mean that we should stop them from viewing this beautiful piece. The same could also be said for Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night. A lack of understanding and awareness of post-impressionism does not mean we should not expose them to these beautiful pieces of art. And I guess when we come to our text selection, the question that I always think about now, especially after being inspired by my current head teacher, what can I appreciate about these texts? And the two examples that I'm going to talk about today are The Lord of the Flies by William Golding. And I've got a lovely frame there to show that I'm framing it as a piece of art. And the same with William Shakespeare's play, Macbeth. Now, to hook my kids in, especially for Lord of the Flies, I like to give a philosophical, theoretical question. What would happen if I stood here for 10 minutes and let you do whatever you want? Now, that idea is not original. That's actually William Golding's inspiration for the novel, because it was an activity that he did with his own class, where he just sat there and observed. So a question like that, which is relatable and gives all kinds of students a chance to answer, can hook them in quite easily. Now, I wanted to appreciate this idea of symbolism. There are a whole range of symbols you could use. These are the 4 that I chose for my middle of the range year 10 class. And I've also done this with a mixed range year 10 class as well. But I've picked the pig's head, or you could also use that to symbolise the beast, the piggy's glasses, the signal fire, and the conch shell. Now, as a nice little period 6 activity, especially for a reluctant class, nice little cutting and pasting activity doesn't go astray. You will see here that I've got 12 boxes, which I'm not expecting you to read in such small font on the screen. But each of those boxes is a chapter summary for one of the chapters in the novel. So once I introduce those 4 symbols that I want to talk about, they have to cut them out, paste them in the correct sequence of events. Then they need to highlight all the elements, all the points where the conch shell is mentioned. They need to do the same for the beast, pig's glasses, and the signal fire. So this gives them a tracking sheet of where all these symbols are mentioned. Now, with my higher order classes, I've been able to get them to do some scene analysis, whereas with my lower classes, we simply said, okay, let's look at all these moments, all these scenes where the conch shell is mentioned, what's happened. And from there, we're able to say, well, there's always usually a meeting or someone saying there's rules or someone speaking. So we were able to use that as a starting point. And this could be easily adapted. I adapted this activity from an original plot summary sheet, but I emphasised the symbols that I wanted to talk about just to make it easier to track. Now, as a result of that, these are some of the comments I got. Why don't we read things like this in English more often? The book we're reading now, which they were studying in term 3 when Lord of the Flies was studied in term 1, the book we're reading now does not have as much to talk about as we did in Lord of the Flies. So, if we were stranded on an island, I would make sure we listened to you, otherwise so-and-so would take over and kill us all. Now, all of these comments came from typically disengaged boys. These were just anecdotal notes of what I heard them say. And some of these boys had never read a book. They were quite open with me and saying they've never finished a book before and that wasn't going to change now. But some of these quotes, that shows that there was some level of engagement there. And even though I finished the unit and I felt like it was a great waste of time and a great waste of energy, these quotes reinforced to me that no, it wasn't. Now, to hook you into my next text, would you kill your best friend for $1 million? Nice, simple question. You can ask more further questions just to get an idea of what their morals are like and what their values are as people. And some of them, yeah, I wouldn't like to be their best friend, especially if $1 million was on the line. Now, if we have a look, I wanted to get my students to appreciate Shakespearean tragedy. Now, I've got 2 elements of the definition there. If you have a weaker cohort, you might stick with the top one. If you want to extend your kids, then you might bring in the second element. But the first dot point, a play in which the main character suffers a downfall, such as them losing their power, they ultimately die at the end, or they become a villain themselves. But to extend them and to give them more sophisticated understanding, in most tragedies, the main characters are in some ways responsible for their downfall due to a tragic flaw. So, simple activity. Give them a red arrow, which looks at where did they begin as the hero, how were they treated and respected by the rest of their community and the people around them, but what led to them getting down to this downfall, to this point of the downfall. So for a simple exercise, for simple explanations, you might have 3 events such as Macbeth killing King Duncan, Macbeth killing Banquo, and Macbeth thinking he was invincible against Macduff. But you might choose to instead bring in some of those flaws, give them a nice little image to unpack what that flaw is. And so this image I use for unchecked ambition, this idea that if your ambition had limits, we would be able to see the end of that ladder. It would have a final point. But because it keeps going and going and going and going, it doesn't stop, mirrors the unchecked ambition of our character. And once you introduce those, our plot points would then turn into Macbeth's ambition for power, Macbeth's greed for power, or Macbeth's arrogance in relation to those events. Now, student feedback. Macbeth is just like that kid in Lord of the Flies. So not only were they able to appreciate how Macbeth was in the play, but they made a connection between 2 classic texts looking at the flaws of these people. Shakespeare's not that bad once you have a go at reading it. Would you say that Trump is a bit arrogant like Macbeth? So there we also have that real world connection as well. So those comments, after a hard slog of teaching this unit, made it all worthwhile. And to finish off, this was the art gallery that I established for my students. I deliberately chose these classic texts because I wanted them to leave their schooling having read some of the greats. And that's not to say that the greats are only classics, but the classics can be used to really show our kids what they can do, and to show that they can actually have higher order thinking. And I hope that when you're curating your gallery and your exhibitions, that you think about the classics. And again, think about what you appreciate from these texts and what we can get these kids to appreciate it. Even if we don't have the 100% success rate, the few comments that we can get show that it is very much worthwhile. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and I sincerely hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.